Good evening. No, good afternoon, everyone. We were just talking about time zones, and now I've just said it's evening, and it probably is evening for some of you. But anyway, good afternoon to you all. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. I know that at least. It is 4 p.m. ET. I know that at least. And we are so thrilled that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 15 going on 16 novels of suspense. My current novel is One Wrong Word, carefully, casually displayed on the door behind me. And my new book, which has just been finished and accepted, is called All This Could Be Yours. And it comes out this time next year. And we will talk about that when the time comes. But today we are here to just give a massive round of applause. Thank you, Stephanie, to Stephanie Wrobel and her amazing, brilliant, ingenious, clever, smart, sophisticated, unputdownable novel, The Hitchcock Hotel. You all, Stephanie, I'm going to talk for one more second about this because I cannot resist. You know, Blazers, I neglected my work to read this. I did not do my responsibilities because I could not wait to read more of this novel. It is so twisty and so unexpected and so incredibly clever. I don't know how she did it, and that is why we're here, because we're here to figure out how Stephanie could possibly have put together this marvelous novel. Brenda says, just got back home from early voting just in time. Good for you, Brenda. We need go vote. Everybody vote. Thank you, Brenda. Kathy Lanigan is here saying, hi, everyone. Happy crime time. If I look over here, I'm looking at the comments. You know this, right? Shannon Hansen is here, and Andrew Ball, Robin Stull. So nice to see you all. Renee Herskowitz and Deborah Pruss and Katie Crutchfield and Christine. So many of you are here today, and thank you so much for being here. We love it. And you lucky, lucky people get to hear all about the Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Wrobel. Put in the comments if you are a Hitchcock fan, and I will talk more about this in a minute. But if you are, you will just be enthralled and in heaven. If you're not, it's still great. And that is part of the genius of this. And we'll talk about that in about 2 seconds. Stephanie, I have been babbling and babbling because I cannot wait for people to hear about this book. Stephanie comes to us today from Los Angeles. And are you just floating with the rave reviews for this novel?
Oh, thank you for having me, Hank. It's so nice to be back here again with a new book. And yes, I mean, I've been, of course, every book has its kind of negative reviews, but overall, the critics have been very kind, which is great. And like we were talking about before we started, this is a departure for me. You know, this is not my classic psychological thriller, or at least it turns into something different. So yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking leading up to pub day to see what the reaction would be, but it's just been wonderful so far.
That's just, it's so great. I mean, it's interesting that you say that it's not your typical psychological thriller, but it turns into something else. It kind of does, but it's, you know, one of the things that every single rave review says, and I'm seeing all the Hitchcock fans in the chat. You should look, Vicky Gregory and Renee and Diane and Andrew and Susie and Stephanie, all saying they're big Hitchcock fans. And I certainly am too. One of the things that all of the rave reviews say is that it's Hitchcockian. I mean, of course it is, because look at the book we're talking about, you all. But what does that mean to you?
So the more research that I did on Hitchcock, you start to notice these sort of commonalities. So for him, he was much more into suspense versus surprise, which we can get into. Of course, for, you know, some of the more superficial things like the Hitchcockian blonde, right? We've got these kind of like cool blonde leading ladies that were mysterious in a way, elegant, like very understated sexiness. He also had certain motifs that he always loved to return to. Really momentous things happened on staircases. Birds, of course, were huge. He had a weird fear of eggs, which I didn't know before I started researching. Milk. There's tons and tons of imagery. So there was so much to play with here.
And tons of imagery. And as I was saying, if you're not a fan of Hitchcock, or you're not acquainted with Hitchcock's movies and television stories, it won't matter. But wow, the references and the allusions throughout, I can't even imagine that I got all of them. But when I did come across someone's name or an event or even the glass of milk, I just, I burst out laughing and praised you to the hilt. Did you put yourself in the book anywhere like Hitchcock did?
Definitely not as overtly as he would. For those who aren't Hitchcock fans, he made a cameo in pretty much every single one of his movies, and there are 53. So it was a real commitment to that gag. I would say, like any writer, I'm present in these characters, hopefully more of the good, the good characteristics than the flaws. But I think where I felt the most in the book is sort of returning to this nostalgia of your college friends and missing that group of people. That was something that is on my mind pretty regularly. I'm not really somebody who spends a lot of time looking in the past, but like any of us, anytime I get to catch up with those college housemates, it's really bittersweet because you remember, God, we used to be with each other all day long, and now everyone's in different states and sometimes countries. And so it's just hard to kind of keep in touch as closely as you would like.
And I love how you use that college reunion-ish motif throughout, and we'll get to that in a minute. Welcome, welcome, welcome to you all, and welcome to Stephanie Wrobel, who's brand new. The Hitchcock Hotel, yeah, I love that, is just out right now, and to rave and fabulous reviews, and it is terrific. If you are new to Crime Time, you have picked a marvelous day to be here. If you are a veteran, we are so happy that you have joined us yet again after for almost 5 years of doing Crime Time. You remember that A Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic by Carolyn Levitt and Jenna Blum, the powerhouse duo, to keep us talking about books and learning about new books and keeping the reading and writing community together. And we have persevered and flourished throughout, and we are still going strong. So I welcome all of you today. Before we talk about the book a little bit more, let me tell you about Stephanie Wrobel very quickly. Stephanie grew up in Chicago, so did I, but has been living in the UK for she's lived in the UK, and then she moved to New York, and now she lives in Los Angeles. I will just this bio that I have here, with her husband and her dog, Moose Barwinkle, which is hilarious. She has an MFA from Emerson College right here in Boston, so we probably saw each other on the street someday, and we didn't even know, and has had short fiction published in Bellevue Literary Review. But before turning to fiction, she worked as a creative copywriter at various advertising agencies. The Hitchcock Hotel is her third novel, and it is terrific, as I keep saying. And Stephanie, the fabulous Stephanie, is giving away a copy of The Hitchcock Hotel, not this one, because I am keeping this one, but a copy of your very own copy of The Hitchcock Hotel to one lucky commenter. So leave a question or leave a comment or tell us your favorite Hitchcock movie, and we'll spin the wheel of fun at the end of the show and pick a lucky winner. And I mean, you are going to be lucky if you win. I see Vicki Gregory is here, and Renee is here, and Sue Street is here. Says, both of you grew up in Chicago. That's so interesting. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. So I will stop talking finally, Stephanie, and get you to please just tell us the basic pitch of the story.
Sure. So we start with this guy named Alfred Smedel, who is absolutely obsessed with Hitchcock. He decides to open this Hitchcock-themed hotel in the White Mountains of New England. And on the 1-year anniversary of the hotel's opening, for reasons unknown to the reader, he decides to invite 5 of his former best friends from college for a free weekend stay. We know he hasn't spoken to them in 16 years. We don't know why, but we know he has some unresolved beef that he intends to settle this weekend. So they all show up with their own motives and secrets. We don't really know why they would come either, but they do, every single one of them. And Hitchcockian chaos ensues.
I love that, Hitchcockian chaos. Absolutely. So with a little bit from this movie and a little bit from this movie and a little bit from this movie and a little bit from this movie, but made into a wholly original story. And that is part of the tour de force of the creation of the Hitchcock Hotel, because it is not like anything you've ever read. And yet it feels incredibly comfortable to read. And it's such a joy. Where did the idea of this come from? The first glimmer of the thought of it?
So this will sound familiar to those who have already read, but I actually took a film studies course myself in college, and I had a professor named Dr. Scott, and he screened North by Northwest, and that was my first exposure to Hitchcock. And Hitchcock made a lot of espionage thrillers. Those are not my favorites. They're great, but my favorites are, no surprise, the dark psychological ones. So then in my 20s, I dabbled and kind of watched the most popular Hitch films like Psycho and The Birds and like those greatest hits, but I never really got to do the deep dive that I wanted. So fast forward then, 15 whatever years later, and I'm trying to come up with this third book idea. And I'm looking around at other thriller authors and like kind of observing what they've been doing. And I've noticed, as I'm sure you have, Hank, that paying homage to Agatha Christie has become hugely popular. And so I was like, you know what like giant of our genre could I kind of do that with? And Hitchcock came to mind. I had wanted to, like I said, do this like deep dive into his filmography. And I was like, you know what? This is an excuse to watch movies in the middle of the day and say I'm doing my job. So, and here it is now.
It's so funny, and it turned out so gorgeously. I mean, there is a little tiny element of Agatha Christie in this, which I thought was really clever, superly clever as well. Maybe two elements of it now that I'm thinking about it. One of the things, just sort of so parenthetically in this, though, is that you said something in your acknowledgments about how your husband didn't think it was a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny how much like people are picking up on that in interviews. I really didn't think that people would, but apparently they do read the acknowledgments, which is great, because I think those are some of the hardest things to write. Yeah, so my husband I should set the stage here. First of all, he's somebody who doesn't really watch anything that was made before like 1980, let's say. He's not one for the classics. He's not going to watch black and white. He's certainly not going to watch silent. And so with that background, like, I came up with this idea with Hitchcock, and he was like, yeah, I guess. He was like, I think some of these, because I had shared like 3 or 4 ideas with him. And I was like, I think some of these other ones are better. But actually that was very helpful, because despite that, I was like, no, I think you're wrong. I'm going to send it anyway and pitch it. And like, sure enough, my editors like all got really excited about it. But it helps to just like ping pong that idea off of someone. And if you find yourself kind of agreeing with them, kind of wishy-washy, like not feeling that strongly, then great, it's done its job. But also like even getting a naysayer and then being like, no, my gut's saying to go forth. Like it was, that was helpful too.
It's really funny. It is wonderful to have a sounding board. And it must have been so much fun to get the responses from your agent or editor saying, wow, this is a terrific idea. The psychological, it's so character driven. It's so carefully structured and so character driven. And you have seamlessly presented us with 7 points of view that we never falter and never fail to understand exactly whose point of view we're in and how those fit together. How complex was it for you to write something that comes across as seeming so seamless?
Oh, thank you for saying that. That was actually the number one thing that I was worried about in the writing of this book. Is I had only done 2 or 3 POVs prior to this. And I was like, ooh, 7, like that's a gamble. I've never done an ensemble. And like, you don't want character soup where you can't tell them apart. So what I actually did, this is so random, but I've always been fascinated by the 7 deadly sins. And I was like, each of these characters is going to represent one of the sins. So that will help me choose their occupation. It will help me choose their key vice. So for example, we have a chef named Zoe. She's gluttony. We have a trust fund kid named Julius. He's sloth. And that was really helpful to just kind of have this 1-word summary of them until they were kind of these flesh and bones people who, could stand on other characteristics. So that really like got me going at the beginning, and hopefully helps differentiate them in the reader's mind too.
I just gasped. I did not get that in the book, but now I just felt the little dominoes in my head going chick, 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 and and as a shorthand for you as an author, that would be such a wonderful guidepost to decide their motivations, their actions, even their little bits of business that they do, and also what would affect them. If you understand what their motivations are, you understand what their fears are as well, and you play with that so gorgeously in the novel. You also put them in this pressure cooker of a place. So let's talk about, first of all, the idea for a Hitchcock themed hotel. Is that just wholly from your imagination, or is there such a thing?
There is not such a thing to my knowledge. I wish there was. I knew I wanted to do a Hitchcock themed something. The first thought that I had was a cruise randomly. I think at the time I had just heard about the Gone Girl cruise, which I don't know if you're familiar. It's like a real life thing that happened. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. But there was something about a hotel that just felt more Hitchcockian. If you think about the classic settings of a lot of his movies, it's like in these huge, creepy manors and, that are supposed to be like the epitome of like luxury and relaxation, and then end up being super gothic and terrifying. So Yeah, there was something about like being in the mountains away, like also secluded away from everyone that really spoke to me. So yeah, the hotel is where it ended up.
And as you know, from a writerly standpoint, when you're writing a locked mansion, essentially mystery, and I kept picturing, the Psycho House, of course, or the gorgeous house in Suspicion. You There is the problem of, like, you bring in 7 people and there's staff in the hotel and everybody has a car and everybody has a cell phone. And besides, you can always make it be a blizzard, but people still have phones. And you
Yeah.
so carefully and so creatively made there be reasons and ways why they couldn't leave. And I just applaud you for that. Was that complicated to do?
Um, Not really, because as any thriller author knows, like you've got to get rid of the means of escape, and you've got to get rid of like phones and internet as soon as you can, because it's too easy to escape today. You know what I mean? Like
That's
help
what I
is
mean,
one
exactly.
click away. You don't even have to dial 911 anymore. You've just got the side button thing. And so I knew, it's become a trope of the genre, but it also has to be there if you're writing contemporary, like in a contemporary setting. And so I did want, with so many characters, I was like, how am I going to get rid of all of their phones at once? And I was, I don't think this is too spoilery to share that Alfred, kind of leans back on these like times in college when it was like a phones free classroom, and we're like revisiting this and it's nostalgic. And yeah, they kind of go along with it, not super happily, but not realizing like how poor of decisions it is to actually end
And,
this
and
book.
you wouldn't. I mean, and that's the thing that I think is such a tour de force again in this novel, is that people do things for reasons that sometimes we know and sometimes we don't know,
Mm.
but they're always wonderfully believable reasons. So you mentioned Alfred, and let's go back to him for a second, because Alfred, the main character, Alfred Smettle, whose name is just perfect in every way. How did you create him? And I mean, one of the tenets of Hitchcock that you mentioned in this novel is that I'm paraphrasing, need to have a really good villain to make the story be
Mm.
good. Is he the villain or not? We're not quite sure, but we don't love him at the beginning, but we understand him. How did you create him?
He in my mind, physically, he was always a cross between Norman Bates and Ichabod Crane, this sort of like tall, lanky figure with like a hooked nose who's, kind of good looking, but then like also has just this unsettling nature to him. So physically, he was just like he was there, like, I think it's hard to get into Hitchcock and not have Norman Bates somewhere in the back of your mind. He's such an iconic character. I think a lot of his development, well, this is actually how I sold the novel, as I just wrote 3 pages in his voice and just kind of like what he was thinking and what he was up to. It wasn't even really like the proper like plot of the book. It was just kind of like this weird guy who's got his micro obsessions. I think like if you're somebody who was born in the 80s like he was, so after Hitchcock had already died, then what are you doing being such a giant Hitchcock fan? And if you're somebody who spends most of your time just like watching black and white movies and like not having a lot of friends, and you spend a lot of time with your mom, like that's going to be somebody who's a little quirky at, you know what I mean? So a lot of that kind of, he's just like very particular. He's got his way of doing things. And I will say, I've noticed that a lot of my characters, especially the ones I'm spending the most time with, like definitely have some type A sort of control freak tendencies, which definitely comes straight from the author, but is like so fun to play with in a more like nefarious way.
But of course, someone who fancies themselves a villain is going to be a type A control freak kind
Yeah.
of character, because if they're essentially unhappy with the world and trying to make it be the way that they want it to be, and have people do the things that they want them to do, and have themselves be in power. And the idea of power in the book is so interesting as well, because the reader, see if I get this right, the reader knows things that the characters don't know. Just another completely Hitchcockian tenet.
Yeah.
But not everything. But not everything. So you had to be really careful in juggling how much information and how many secrets you doled out through the book to not, so that the reader is not confused, but just tantalized throughout. How top of mind was that to you, to know? Did you know everyone's secrets and when those were going to come out?
I did know most of their secrets, but I will say, like, after turning in the first draft, my editors were like, "Man, this Zoe chick, like, you really piled a lot on her. Like, maybe we give some of the other characters like her issues." So TJ ended up like receiving one of Zoe's main issues because it was just like too much too fast. It's interesting that you bring up this idea. It's going back to the suspense versus surprise. For those who aren't as familiar, Hitchcock liked to use the bomb under the table example, where if there's a bomb under the table and two people are talking at a cafe, and for 15 minutes the audience knows the bomb is there, the characters don't, that's suspense. If the audience doesn't know until the bomb goes off that it's there, that's surprise. And he didn't have a lot of love for surprise. He was all about suspense. He always wanted his audience to be a step or two ahead of the characters. And I think we've gotten away from that in our genre. Like, I think we are mostly about surprises. It's a lot about the twist that the audience can't see coming, that the reader is completely shocked by. And so, especially in the first half, I really wanted to make a concerted effort to have some more elements of what Hitchcock would call suspense, i.e., like the reader has a sense that Alfred has something diabolical in store, but all of the guests who have shown up don't necessarily.
Yes, and the thing that's so cool about that example about the bomb under the table and suspense and surprise, which I use in every writing class because it is so perfect. I mean, just as an example, you all, when one bird lands on the power line in the birds, and then another one lands, and then another one lands, and you think, oh, is that a coincidence? And then another one lands, and then the shot changes to a million birds. I mean, you can't get creepier. You can't get creepier than that. Or the glass of milk in Suspicion, that we think, oh my goodness, it's poisoned. Oh my goodness, it's poisoned. We're just certain it does, but we don't really know. And that you can hear the music of those movies, and you can hear that same music in this book, as who would keep an aviary of birds in their hotel? And we're like, oh, Stephanie, we get this. But I do think one of talking about that suspense and surprise, the reader knows, I mean, sort of two mysteries. The reader knows something bad is going to happen to someone, but we don't know who to, and we don't know why, and we don't know what will happen after that. So there are several solutions that have to happen along the way. And I'm not giving anything away by saying that. Did you have that structure in your head? Did you know that those dominoes would fall?
I knew before I started writing, I knew that we would start with this guy standing in the parking lot waiting for his friends to show up. I knew who was going to die and at what point in the book, but I did not know who the murderer was. I knew some of the Hitchcockian elements that we've talked about, phones disappearing, all of that. I knew some of that ahead of time, but I didn't know who was perpetrating all of that stuff. So is it the same people or person as the murderer, or are these different people? And if they're different, why are they doing this? So it was quite different to how I've written my previous books, where I've usually tried to plan everything out beforehand. It was really fun. It was like a puzzle box for me as I went along, of just like, okay, well, now we've got, this X thing that's happened. Like, who did it?
That's one of the things, Stephanie, that is such a triumph in this novel, because it is so much fun to read. And I'm in awe of your research. I do have to say, and as I was saying earlier, I'm not sure I got all the allusions, but I got some of them. And some of them are hilarious. I found out about the name of the college, which I won't mention. But how did you so carefully figure out that there would be, oh, milk, oh, and this is not giving anything away, oh, milk, oh, rope, oh, someone's name, or a bird. Did that just evolve as you were writing it, and you think, oh, I could use that from that movie and that from that movie?
It evolved a little bit. I will say, like, when I research for a book, which is all of my books, it's just different facets of research. I tend to go a little overboard with the first draft, to the point where my editors will be like, this is not an academic paper. Let's get back to the narrative stuff. Or like, in the first draft, I had it was more like guests being kind of spooked or pranked, like, oh, a bird wakes you up in the morning at 6 o'clock, like released into your room. And my editor was like, who would actually stay at this place? And like, it's a valid point. So yeah, I think my initial impulse is to put all of it in, and then I just like slowly have to pull it out and, okay, not every single reference can go in there. Initially, those like interstitials that, are in the form of student essays, that kind of have some factoids about Hitchcock or his movies. Initially, those were integrated into just the regular chapters, but they were slowing down the narrative too much. So again, my editor suggested, like, why don't we put these as their own little separate things so they're not kind of slowing down the pace of conversation, or like realistically, how many people are interested in talking about Hitchcock for an hour at dinner? Only two of the people, yeah, besides us. Only two of the friends are like huge Hitchcock and fans and movie buffs. The others were just kind of like, yeah, it's like an easy A, so we'll go along with it and just like kind of take the class. So yeah, that was.
Stephanie is talking about their little sort of interstitial pages that have Hitchcock quotes in them, but they're not random. They're not random. Each one actually fits perfectly for what's coming up in the book. And I do also love how you pair the luxury of the hotel. I mean, take away the scary parts, it would be really beautiful with lovely food. And then juxtapose that with the scary things that happen along the way. And you can read it with the lights off. It's suspenseful, right? And that's the thing that's really cool about it. Did you go to a gorgeous inn like this to see how the rooms would be set up and how the rooms might be connected and how the light might be and how they run the back of the house?
I did not go specifically to like a B&B type place. I used, there's this Scottish hotel that looks like a hunting lodge, and it's called the Fife Arms. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, in northern Scotland. I used that as the inspiration for a lot of the decor. I will say, for a different book that is unpublished, it was about this woman who is a recluse and hasn't left the house in 3 years, hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 years, and she lives in this manor in the English countryside. And so for that book, I did actually go to this giant house. I mean, we're talking like 27 rooms, and I did stay there for a weekend alone. So I do feel like I got a sense of like the spookiness of being in the Hitchcock Hotel is not even as big as this house was, but I did sort of get that vibe, you know what I mean? That sort of atmospheric sense of dread of like what is happening, behind each of these doors.
Yes, and just sort of reprise what we were talking about, the suspense versus surprise, which is such a powerfully centric to this book. The whole book is suspense versus surprise because we know something's going to happen. And so from page one, from moment one, you cleverly make us realize we better read on because we cannot put it down until we find out what it is that's going to happen. The level of suspense is just so full of portent throughout. Has your husband read it now? Does he agree that it's a good idea?
Yeah, as soon as he read, whatever the first or second draft, I can't remember which one at this point, but he was really into it. And that is because I don't think he realized like there's going to be a complete story on its own. As you said at the top, like you don't have to be a Hitchcock fan to appreciate this book. Hopefully, I think you get more out of it if you are, but certainly it's just it's a suspense novel that can stand on its own. And so he actually did. He really liked it. And even before my editors gave feedback, he was like, I was totally wrong. Thank God you ignored me. So that was very validating.
Are you getting him? I mean, who wouldn't love North by Northwest? Who wouldn't love Suspicion and Notorious? Has he watched them?
I think there's a sense so he does not like scary movies. And I think a lot of people think that Hitchcock is scarier than he was. Like by 2024 standards, his movies are not terrifying. We're not talking about the Saw series here. It's a little like spooky and chilling, but you're not going to be unable to sleep for most of them. Maybe there's like a couple exceptions. So I'm still working on convincing him.
Well, part of Hitchcock that's so wonderful and also that you portray. And then coming up, we're going to take some questions. So many people are here today. It's marvelous to see you all. Julie Brinkley is here, and Andrew is here, and Robin is here, Sue Street. And now I totally forgot what I was going to ask you. Oh yeah, one of the things that you also corral in this novel that's so marvelous about Hitchcock movies as well is the sexual tension and the dialogue and the banter and the layers and the undercurrent, which is also marvelously portrayed in this book. Was that fun too? The dialogue is absolutely terrific.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, banter is always fun. I think, when I write a first draft, you would think that these characters are just like suspended in space. There's absolutely no description of anything, but it's all action and it's all dialogue. So dialogue is just something that I comes pretty easily, I would say, to me, which is a blessing given the other things that don't. But yeah, it was the thing I was nervous about. Again, going back to these different characters is like, are they going to sound different enough? Are they going to be confused? So that was the trickiest part. But in terms of just the more bantery elements of dialogue, like, yeah, that's a ton of fun.
And also knowing that they haven't really been in contact, they've lost touch with each other for all these years, and they see each other in a way as the people that they knew 16 years ago, and they're learning, as we are, who the characters are now. And so we're allowed to understand and learn more about these characters as they relearn and re-see each other, and that works really well. That works really well too. Let's take some questions, Joel. I'm just going to keep babbling about how good this book is until you start asking some questions, and I know there are a million more questions that you all would like to ask. So Margaret in the back room, tell us, Katie, good question. What did you learn about yourself after writing this book?
I learned that I can write a whodunit. So I had never written a murder mystery before. My previous books were definitely more psychological suspense. This one, I think, is the plottiest book that I've written. And at the outset, I really wasn't confident I could pull it off, to be honest. There's even more threads that you have to hold, and that cross-reference, and you tug on one and everything else falls apart. But I think it came together in the end, and it was more fun than I thought it would be to try it. So yeah, I'm always looking for ways to kind of play to the outsides of the box, the thriller genre box, and like, how can I expand my craft? How can I challenge myself? So that was definitely it with this one.
What did you learn about what is key about writing a murder mystery?
I think
for a friend.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's like twists are so hard because it has to be something that is within, it can't just be completely out of left field. There have to be clues, but then like, obviously it also needs to be a mystery. So I think the importance of misdirects, there's a lot of them in the book that like really just don't go anywhere. But that was really helpful to realize like everything doesn't need to be this kind of like linear, you know what I mean? Like,
yes, and it wouldn't be in the world. It wouldn't be linear in the world. But because people are suspicious, they, you touch the thing and you think, is this something? Is this something?
Yeah.
And in real life, it's not always. It's not always something, but but our minds make it be something. And that makes it all the scarier. When I think about twists, I always think that it's more a reveal that someone knows something that they're just not quite ready to tell, or that the author isn't quite ready to tell. It's not a shock, a surprise. It's a revelation of something. Oh, here's little did you know, X, Y, and Z. And you do that gorgeously. You give us just enough to make it irresistible. Who else has a question? Who was your hardest character to create, and who was your favorite character, says Julie Brinkley, and who was the hardest to flesh out?
So favorite characters are Alfred and his housekeeper, Danny, because they are the weirdest. And I'm just forever in love with, like, the weirder the character, the more that I love them. The hardest to flesh out was probably Zoe. So she is one of the friends who shows up. Not all 5 of these friends could get equal page time. And she's one of the more important characters. A lot of the book hinges on her. I mentioned earlier some of the struggles that I had with putting too much on her shoulders and just like overly complicating the character. So yeah, getting her right, both from a plot perspective and a character perspective, took a good amount of time.
And some of the names are wonderfully chosen as well. And I think we'll just leave that right here and we'll go on to the next question. Oh, Sharon. Hi, Sharon. Did you write the POVs in order or jump back and forth?
I wrote in chapter order. So in order to stagger, like I said, avoid this character soup thing, what I actually did was, the first, let's say 30% of the book, it's only 3 points of view. And then like 10% later, you add another one in, and then another 10%, you add another one in. And so my hope was that would give readers the time to get used to a few people before throwing another name into the bunch. But yeah, I definitely did not write like all the PO, like, all of Julius's chapters. And then it would have just, for me, been too hard to write it that way with, with all the clues and stuff as well. So it's written in chapter order.
Yes, and that's how I do it too. And I think that's the most logical way to do it, and it allows the author to reveal what they need to reveal to the reader when the time comes for them to do that. And she's also helped the readers by naming the chapter in case you missed the point of view. But you will never do it. You wouldn't need the names, but readers always love that. I know that. Who else has a question? Have we discussed this book jacket? Good question, Kathy. It's powerful and beautiful. I know if you see a bathtub and a crow and it says and a shower curtain and it says the Hitchcock Hotel, you kind of know what you're going to get. Talk a little bit about the cover.
Yeah, so my publisher has just nailed all 3 of my covers so far, in my opinion. This is honestly very close. The first draft that they showed me is very close to this finished copy. I might have changed one thing, or one small thing that I can't even remember anymore, to be honest. I knew there would be Hitchcockian allusions, but I love just like the big bathtub that, of course, like harkens back to Psycho, and then the bird, the telephone that's kind of discarded on the side. And I like that. I like the bright colors. So with my first 2 books, they're pink and bright green. And, this one, the background is black, but you've still got that nice poppy kind of tangerine shade. So yeah, I was just thrilled with how it came together. I'm always looking for covers that are going to stand out on the thriller shelf because, you tend to see a lot of the same stuff. So any little things that we can do to stand out that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, the phone is great as well. What a touch. It must have been so much fun. And it will be such a joy for you to read this book. We've been getting the inside scoop on the Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Wrobel. Let's spin the wheel of fun and see what lucky reader gets to win a copy of this fantastic book. And we will spin. Hey, you all. It's so nice to see your names like this. I love that. And the winner is Kim Rudder. That is so great. Oh, Kim, you are the luckiest person in the world. This is great. And you will email me, and I will email our executive producer, who will email Stephanie's publicist. And that's how you will get your book, because that is how it works. The rest of you, you know what to do. Not right now, but in about 30 seconds, run, click, click, click. Get your very own copy of this book. It is a marvelous gift also for someone who loves Hitchcock movies. They would absolutely adore reading this. So just a little word to the wise about that. Congratulations, Kim Rudder. That is great. And congratulations to you, Stephanie. This is quite a triumph. Do you have a lot of events? Can you tell us about your website and your social media places so that people can find you?
Sure. My website is stephaniewrobel.com, and my Instagram handle is the same, just my name, Stephanie Wrobel, Wrobel.
Terrific. Congratulations on everything. Again, we've been talking to Stephanie Wrobel, whose new book, The Hitchcock Hotel, is just out. And before you go, let me tell you that now write this down on your calendars. Next week, we are off because I'm giving a big speech out of town and I just can't do this and I will miss you. But we are coming back on whatever day that would be after that, which would be, I'm looking at my calendar right now, November 5th, November 5th. For Jason Rikulik's The Last One at the Wedding. I am just starting to read this, and I'm a massive fan of his. If you read Hidden Pictures, which is brilliant, very different from Stephanie's book, and interesting that there can be 2 such high levels of brilliance in very different genres. This one is The Last One at the Wedding by Jason Rikulik, and we will be talking to him on November the 5th at 4 p.m. ET, so you be here then. Stephanie, again, thank you. I hope you find a wonderful place to live in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Hank. This was super fun.
It's fun for me too. Thank you. And what could be better, you all, than to get to read a fabulous book and talk to a wonderful author and be here with all of you. And we will see you again on November 5th. Remember that, for The Last One at the Wedding. And until then, you know what I'm going to say. It is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.